Hello, everybody. Welcome to the B78 Endurance Hub webinar series. This is the third webinar that we've put together. Hopefully, you've had a chance to check out the first two. If not, you can find them in the back end of the Endurance Hub. Our goal here with these webinars really is to share as much information as we can with you. And it's going to be everything from very beginner intro stuff like terminology, like we're doing today, all the way up to some more advanced topics that we'll cover a bit later. On today's episode, we're keeping it really simple. I don't know about you, but the first time I ever showed up on a swim deck, I was new to swimming, about 20 years ago or more, and I really wanted to improve my swimming. So I thought I'll join a master's group. And the first time I showed up on deck, it was like the coach was talking a different language. It was like all the stuff on the board was a different language. Like many sports and many different industries, there's a lingo. There's a language that people speak. And really, my goal for this webinar is to go through as much of that as possible, so that if you are going to join a master's group, or maybe you're getting a program online from somebody, and you don't really know what they're saying some of the time. Now, hopefully, a good coach will make it pretty clear what you're supposed to do. And hopefully, whether you're on deck with a coach at a master's group or on a swim team, or you're getting a program online, hopefully you have a comfort level to reach out to the coach if you're not understanding what they're talking about. It's really important to be clear on what you're supposed to do. I think you'll find, like most things, the more you dive into this, the more you'll learn the language and the lingo. But for now, let's go through a whole bunch of different terms and phrases and see if we can clear some of that up for you. Okay, let's dive in here. Swim lingo. Here we go. So, a couple different things. First one we're going to talk about is lane etiquette. So you might hear this phrase bounced around a little bit. Now, if you're brand new to swimming and you show up at the pool, obviously you're going to see when there are lanes available for swimming, you'll see the pool divided up into different lanes with lane ropes. So our second little term there is lane ropes. Now, that's pretty obvious. The more important thing to know here is what we call lane etiquette. At most public swims or in a master's group, the lane etiquette is that you will swim up one side and down the other. Now, living in North America, usually that's up the right side. So when you get to the other end of the pool, you're coming back down the opposite side that you went. And usually it's the same flow as traffic would be outside, just for ease. Now, if you're from New Zealand, Australia, somewhere in Europe where they drive on the other side of the road, maybe the lane direction is different. I actually swam for a team where we would go up the right, down the left, up the right side on one lane, and then the opposing lane would go the opposite way, so that you didn't connect with somebody's arms on the way through. It's a little tricky to describe that, but you can imagine if you're swimming very close, even if you're in a separate lane and your arms collide, it can be quite painful. So we had a system where, the odd lanes went in this direction and the even lanes went in the other direction. Now, most pools keep it really simple. They may even have a board at the end of the lane that shows you the direction. Really important to pay attention to that, because if you jump into a lane where people are swimming around in circles and you start going the wrong way, you're going to have a head-on collision with somebody, and then everybody gets angry. And trust me, lane rage is a real thing. And if you haven't experienced it, you probably will at some point. People get pretty protective of their lanes. If you're in a master's group, it'll be made very clear to you. The other part of lane etiquette is they usually designate lanes as different speeds. So if you're going to a public swim and they have 2 or 3 lanes that they have dedicated for lane swimming, you'll note that they probably indicate that this is the slow lane, medium lane, fast lane. If you're like me and you're self-deprecating to a fault sometimes, you may consider yourself very, very slow. But if you jump in there and you're immediately passing everybody else in that lane, then you should consider moving to another lane, because the people in that lane probably won't be too stoked with you. Let's talk about long course and short course. Well, so when you hear these two terms in relation to swimming, generally what they're talking about is the length of the pool. So most pools that you'll go to at a rec facility are 25 meters. If you're in the US, 25 yards, it's often the case. So that's called a short course lane or a short course pool. A long course pool is a 50-meter pool. And those are pretty obvious. If you've been to a facility with a 50-meter pool, it's pretty striking. It's a large, large space that it covers. Now, often those long course pools will have what's called a bulkhead, which moves up and down the pool so they can separate the pool into two 25-meter pools. It's a great system. It means you can have lots of programs going on at the same time. And most of the time, pools will be set up as short course pools or 25-meter pools, even if they are a long course pool, even if it's a 50-meter pool, because you just have more programs that can run at the same time. So it's a better setup. Okay, so let's say you're on the deck now and the coach is explaining the workout, or maybe your coach has sent you a workout online. Usually the workout will be broken up into three really manageable pieces. The first is the warm up, super, self-explanatory. This is the part where you warm the body up before you get ready to do the main set. At the other end of the workout will be a cool down, and that's usually a short little piece just to kind of unwind you a little bit from the work. The main set of a workout is the part where you're actually doing some work. And this is the part of the set that should have a real purpose. There should be a focus to it. There should be a goal of kind of stressing a particular energy system or something like that. So when you have a workout, make sure you understand the three different chunks. A warm up is typically 800 to 1200 meters if you're a more advanced swimmer, maybe 400 to 600 meters if you're a more beginner swimmer. The point really is to get the body ready to go for that main set. Cool down, usually a bit shorter, usually just to unwind a little bit after the hard work. Let's talk about some of the equipment that you might see. Now, in the last webinar we did, I focused a lot on swim equipment, and I showed a whole bunch of stuff from pool swimming to open water swimming. So some of this overlaps. But I thought it good just to show you a couple more pieces just so that you are refreshed. And certainly, I mean, if you're showing up the pool on your own without a master's group or a swim club, there's a lot of toys that you can use at the pool. And usually these things will be in big bins or on racks on the wall. And, generally the facilities have them there for you to use. Unless they explicitly say otherwise, they're there for you to use. So take advantage of that. Now, if you're in a master's program, they're going to designate the times when they want you to use these pieces of equipment. Likewise, if you have a swim program from a coach somewhere else and you're just going on your own, they should be clearly designating when they want you to use these pieces of equipment. And some of these equipment choices will fall into their philosophy of whether they actually like using these things or not. Coaching's an interesting thing. Every coach has a different philosophy, and some like this and some like that. And, you have to really just dive in and believe in what you're doing in that moment, and take it from there. So top left there, that's a kickboard, pretty easy. Usually we hold these out in front of us and we just use our legs. So it takes the arms out of the equation and we just kick. Second picture there, middle top, is a pull buoy. So this is a piece of equipment that floats and it goes between your legs. And really the purpose is to take the legs out of the equation so that we swim primarily with our arms. This is actually a pretty good tool for beginner swimmers because a lot of times beginner swimmers' legs sink and it can be quite frustrating and quite tiring. But if you put a pull buoy in, it puts your body in a more favorable position. You can focus on the arms a little bit more and it's a little more comfortable. The other thing a pull buoy does that's really nice is it sort of mimics how a wetsuit feels. So certainly if you're in triathlon, wetsuit swimming is a big part of that sport. And so using a pull buoy can help you focus on the arms, take the legs out of the equation. It's a little more efficient. Important with all these pieces of equipment is they should never become a crutch, right? So, you still have to learn how to swim without these pieces of equipment. These are tools that we use to enhance a certain feeling or get a certain result, but ultimately you have to learn how to swim without any equipment. That third picture there, top right, kind of hard to see, but that's a band. If you look closely at that swimmer's legs, you'll see a band around their ankles. This is another tool that we use. You won't really find these on the pool deck. Usually we would make these out of old tire inner tubes and have our own on hand. And some coaches really like these as a way to really take the legs out of the equation. When you use just a pull buoy, you can still kick your feet a little bit, but some coaches really like you to take it to the next level and really shut down the legs entirely. So there's lots of good reasons to use a band as well as a pull buoy or a band on its own, which is very challenging. Bottom left there, those are fins. Pretty easy to see those. Swim fins, typically that you'll find at a rec facility, they're not what you would expect if you were scuba diving. They're definitely not that big. Usually they're a bit shorter. Your legs have to work a little bit harder. They still give you lots of propulsion, more propulsion than you'll get without the fins. But they're a little bit shorter, so you have to work it a little bit harder. Bottom middle there, that's a snorkel. Now, these are not scuba diving snorkels. They're very different. They actually go up right up the center of your face so that you can swim. When you're swimming straight ahead, you can keep your head in a nice position and you don't have to worry about the breathing. Very not favorable to use a traditional snorkel that comes out the side because you'll have all this weird resistance and it creates all kinds of turbulence. So stay away from those. If you're going to get into using a snorkel for swim training, you really need to get the one that is shown in this picture, which goes right up the center. And last but not least, you'll see some very colorful hand paddles. So hand paddles are something that, again, you should take the advice of the coach that you're working with and use them only if indicated. So you can do pulling with or without paddles. You should only do pulling with paddles when your stroke is competent and enough that it's not going to cause issues. Paddles add a tremendous amount of resistance, and so you just have to be a little bit careful there. Note that those paddles are different colors. Those are size indicators. So this particular company likes to indicate that their bigger paddles, bigger, smaller paddles come in different colors just so they're easy to recognize. Okay, this is one of the most important things you'll see at a swim facility. And even though we have amazing technology these days, I would urge you to get familiar with the pace clock. So if you've ever been to a rec center, swimming pool, a lot of times you'll see this big clock on the wall with 4 different colored hands or a smaller clock like that bottom picture. These are timing clocks. And if you're on a swim team or swim club, certainly if you grew up with swimming, this webinar is super boring for you already. But what I'm saying is this is the timing device that swim clubs and swim teams use. They don't really use Garmin's or watches to time their sets. Those smartwatches can be a little fluky in the water. Sometimes they don't like it if you're kicking. Sometimes the distance you actually swam doesn't match up with what your watch said, and that can be kind of frustrating. I would urge you to become proficient with these pace clocks. This is the best way to go about it in the water. I know everybody likes to have their Garmin file uploaded to their workout log so they see all the numbers. That's fine, but also get good at using this. If you ever join a master's group or something, this is the tool that they're going to use. You'll notice that there's 4 different colored hands, and you'll see a few more sort of phrases here. So leaving on the top. So if you're at a master's club and the club, they generally use the red hand, let's say. The red hand seems to be a very popular one. Maybe it's the easiest to see. But let's say that red hand is down at the 35 that you can see on that clock there. And the coach says, we're going to leave on the top. Usually they'll say we're going to leave on red top or blue top or green top. That just means when that hand gets back up to the top of the clock, that start is setting. That set is starting. So let's take an example. Let's say you're doing a set of 10 times 100. And the coach says, okay, we're going to leave on the red top. It means when the hand gets around to the top, that set is beginning. The other great thing with these clocks is that, in lanes, typically at a master's club, or even if you go to a public swim where they have lanes, there might be 3, 4, 5 people in that lane. And we also use the clock to set distance between swimmers. So if my lane has 5 people in it and we're all doing the same set, the first swimmer will go on the red top. And in short course, typically you'll leave 5 seconds between swimmers, especially if you have 4 or 5 people in the lane. If you leave any more distance between that first swimmer is going to be back around, and it's going to get a little chaotic. So 5 seconds is usually the preferred. If you have lots of space, maybe fewer people in the pool, or you're doing long course, so the 50-meter pool, sometimes they'll leave 10 seconds apart. But in this case, the first swimmer is going on the red top. The next swimmer is going when it gets to the 5, and then to the 10, and then to the 15, and so on. And in a set like that 10 times 100 one, we'll talk about the next thing on this list, which is pace time. There might be a pace time. So it might be 10 times 100 meters on 2 minutes. What that means is when you go, you're going to swim your 100 meters. And no matter what your time is, whether it's 140 or 150, you're going to go on 2 minutes. Now, a good coach will set that pace time such that the rest interval you're getting is what they want you to get. So if it's a threshold set, let's say, where they don't want you to have much rest, they should be scheduling that pace time so that you're getting 10 or 15 seconds rest. Another expression you might hear in relation to timing is leaving on a specific rest interval. So let's say instead of saying we're going to do 10 times 100 on 2 minutes, they might say we're doing 10 times 100 on 10 seconds rest, or on 15 seconds rest. So that is just to make sure you're getting the same amount of rest every time, no matter what your time is. There are two kind of different ways to come about it. Usually with more entry level or beginner swimmers, it's easier just to tell them a specific amount of rest that you want them to have, because maybe their paces are a little inconsistent as they're figuring it out. But as you become more competent, more advanced, definitely you'll see lots of sets that are very specific on the pace time. So 10 times 100 on 2 minutes. Okay. Let's for a second here just talk about the 4 different strokes that happen in swimming. Now, as a triathlete, really you're honing in on what we call freestyle or front crawl. That is the stroke that typically is the most efficient as well as the fastest. So you could argue breaststroke's pretty easy. You can make breaststroke a nice easy stroke, but it's not particularly fast. So the default stroke really for triathlon is freestyle. And certainly if you join a master's club or you're getting a program online from somebody, the bulk of what you do is going to be freestyle swimming or front crawl swimming. But there are other strokes, and I certainly would encourage you, especially as you carry on in this journey, is to try the other strokes. They all complement each other. A lot of times the catch phase of the strokes are very similar, like the catch phase, like the top part of the stroke for butterfly and breaststroke and freestyle are all very similar. And it's just a nice change up. It's good to try different things in the water. So that first stroke, obviously butterfly, is probably one of the most beautiful strokes to look at. It's quite dramatic. Both arms come out of the water, and it's a very difficult stroke to do. So when you see somebody doing butterfly well, it's pretty neat because it's not easy. Backstroke, easiest way to identify that is the person's on their back. Breaststroke, that's probably the most familiar one for people. I think that's where we start out as kids because our head can kind of be out of the water. Now, Olympic level breaststroke is very dynamic and very fast, and they actually go under the water quite a bit. So, and then freestyle, obviously, front crawl, we also call freestyle. Now, when you combine all those strokes in that order, it's called IM, or individual medley. So you might hear that term thrown around, and now you know what you're doing. If a coach ever gives you, say, a 200 IM, it means you're doing 50 meters of butterfly, then 50 meters of backstroke, and then breaststroke, and then freestyle. Now, if you're a beginner swimmer and a master's coach gives you 200 IM, that's going to be tricky. It's quite difficult. But sometimes they'll throw in the other strokes just to mix it up and and, get you more body awareness, which is a good thing. Very common actually in swim workouts is to get the word choice. And you might be like, well, what's that? Well, basically it's your choice. Usually when I am coaching triathletes, when you give them choice, whatever choice they want, they just swim freestyle. They default to freestyle all the time. So if I have somebody that I know does that, but I actually want them to do the other strokes just maybe in the warm up or the cool down or for something different, I'll indicate like, no, you can't do freestyle. You have to do something else, like challenge yourself in a different way. So choice is a word you will hear quite a lot. Let's talk about a few different aspects of swimming. So you might hear the word catch. Now, when a coach talks about catch, they mean the front part of the stroke. So that first part of the stroke, when the arm goes in, and now we're getting a nice high elbow, and we're catching the water. Okay, that's what's referred to as your catch. Your finish is at the other end. So when you're pushing your hand out the back down by your hip, that's the finish of the stroke. Sculling is a drill / tool we use to really help people develop feel in the water. I would encourage you after this video to go on YouTube, just enter swimming sculling, and you'll get dozens or thousands of videos. Sculling is a really great way if you're a beginner to learn how to feel the water. And it's basically just very subtle hand movements, either at the top of the stroke there, or kind of in the middle, or down at the finish part of the stroke. You can do all kinds of different sculling drills. It's really, really effective way to learn how to feel the water. Vertical kick. So usually when we're kicking, we're using a kickboard or no kickboard, but we're on our front or our side or on our back. But sometimes a coach will make you do vertical kick. And this is in the deep end, and you're straight up and down. You're not actually moving anywhere. You're just trying to keep your head above the water by vertically kicking. It's a great little drill to help teach kicking mechanics as well. It's just something different and kind of fun. And then drills. There's a bottomless pit of drills that a coach might throw at you for swimming. Hopefully, if you get drills in your program, they're explained well. A drill is just a way to enhance a certain part of the stroke or get us to feel something different in the stroke. They're useful, particularly in warm-ups, or if you're trying to change something or you're trying to emphasize something. But certainly you don't want to become reliant on them. Drills serve a purpose, but then beyond that, you need to get on with getting fit around a swim stroke. Let's talk about some other terms. So you might hear the word build. What this means is that you're going to build your pace or build your speed as the set goes on or as that interval goes on. So if a coach says to you, okay, we're going to do 100 and I want you to build by 25. What that means is they want you to go a little bit faster each 25 within that 100. Okay. So that's just learning to kind of control your pace. Very frequent in swimming is the word descending. Let's take, for example, a set where they say 8 times 50 meters, descending 1 to 4. What that means is they want you to get a little bit faster each interval. So the fourth one is the fastest. And then you start back at the beginning again. So that fifth one can be a little bit slower. And then the eighth one needs to be the fastest. So descending sets are a really, really great way to help you learn to control and manage your speed in the water, which is something that's typically tougher for more beginner swimmers. Rate of perceived exertion goes across all sports. Sometimes it's abbreviated to RPE. This is just a way to measure effort, on a scale of 1 to 10. If 10 is maximum effort and 1 is I'm barely moving, well, rate of perceived exertion can fit anywhere along that scale and kind of just help you tune in with how hard you're going. Sometimes in swimming, we'll do threshold sets. So that's basically like right at your limit of what's sustainable. Okay, so great example. Let's go back to 10 times 100 again. Let's say that's a threshold set. The goal in that set is to hold basically your fastest possible time across the set. So that first one and the last one should line up pretty closely. When you cross threshold, usually that means it's unsustainable, right? So we're up, above our threshold and into a different energy system, and maybe we can't hang on to it for that long. Endurance sets, usually they're a little lower on the rate of perceived exertion scale, the RPE scale. Threshold, by the way, would be like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Endurance sets maybe 6 or a 7 out of 10. So they're more sustainable. It's a little more gentle, but it's still quite deliberate. And then sprinting obviously is very, very fast, and probably a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Okay, one of the things that's very unique to swimming are breathing patterns, and they're unique because we don't have the freedom to just breathe whenever we want in the water. That's what makes swimming. One of the things that makes swimming so tough is that we just don't have the freedom to breathe all the time. So coaches will often throw what we call breathing patterns at you. Now, the most basic one is learning how to bilateral breathe. What that means is we're basically just learning to breathe off of both sides. So sometimes I turn my head to this side and sometimes I turn my head to this side. Now, you're probably going to have a side that feels more comfortable. I always did. Even after 20 years of swimming, I always had a side that felt better. But I became very good at breathing off of both sides. In races, I would breathe whenever I needed to breathe. But you need to be proficient on both sides because maybe you need to check out like some of the action over here if you're in a really heated race, or try and get on someone's feet over here, or maybe the waves are crashing in one direction and hitting you in the face, so it's more favorable to breathe to a different side. It also can balance your stroke out a little bit, which is nice. So I think as part of your swim journey, it's really useful to learn how to bilateral breathe. Along with that are breathing patterns. So sometimes a coach might say, okay, we're going to do 200 meters and I want you to breathe every 3, 5 by 50. And what that means is for the first 50 meters, you're going to breathe every 3 strokes. And for the next 50 meters, you're going to breathe every 5 strokes. And then you're going to go back to every 3 and then back to 5. Now, you can stretch this out. I mean, sometimes coaches will give you sets where it's like breathing 3, 5, 7, 9. And what that means is on one of those 50s, you're going to be breathing every 9 strokes, which is like very, very tough. But again, it's about breath control. There's an element of fitness that you can gain from that. And then just learning to breathe off of both sides is very, very valuable. Let's talk about pulling. So pulling is a very common thing in swimming. Usually when we pull, we have a pull buoy between our legs. So one of our earlier slides showed a picture of a pull buoy. And then sometimes we pull with paddles. So remember those colorful paddles I showed you? And sometimes we pull without paddles. And sometimes we pull with a band. And sometimes we pull without a band. The gist of it is that whenever you're pulling, usually you have a pull buoy in between your legs. To take the legs more or less out of the equation, put the emphasis on the arms. There's many, many reasons that we do this. If you have a great coach, hopefully they can explain those reasons to you. But I think it's just important to understand what these terms mean. I know when we program, we always try and do a good job of being explicit about whether we want you to pull with paddles or without paddles. I mentioned earlier that pulling with paddles, you should only really do that when your stroke mechanics are good. Otherwise, you're just sort of overemphasizing bad stroke mechanics, and it can lead to potentially to injury as well. Let's talk about a few of the terms around kind of distance per stroke and strokes per minute and stroke rate. So strokes per minute, sometimes abbreviated to SPM. That's basically how many strokes are you taking in a minute. So similar to cadence on a bike or foot strikes in a minute when we're running, it's basically the rate at which your arms are going, and we measure it kind of like cadence or RPM. Strokes per length is something that a lot of swim clubs will use, swim coaches will use as a way to help you lengthen your stroke out. Really, there's 2 things going on when we swim. One is how fast are you spinning your arms around, and the other is how far are you going with each stroke. So that's distance per stroke. That's the other thing on here, DPS. And really, we want a combination of the 2. So one of the ways that coaches will emphasize strokes per length is to actually get you to count how many strokes are you taking per length. And often the goal is to decrease the number of strokes you take per length. Now, obviously, there's a threshold you cross where, it's just silly. You're stretching out way too much and there's no arm turnover. So you're not really going that fast. So you kind of need a balance of the two things. But learning to count your strokes per length and getting in tune with that is really, really valuable in your swim journey. It's a nice number to know. And, usually over time, your strokes per length will decrease because your distance per stroke increases. And ultimately, we want that as well as our ability to turn the arms over. We kind of want to work on both things and have both things go in the right direction. So the last thing there, turnover, that's just the same thing. How fast are you turning your arms over? Let's talk about flip turns. So certainly if you're new to swimming and you go to a master's group or you go to a public swim and you see someone really speedy, usually they're doing flip turns. And that's when they do literally a somersault at each end of the pool. And then they push off the wall. And it's just a really quick, efficient way to change directions. Even if you're a beginner, I would encourage you to work on this like every time you get in there. Just spend 2 or 3 minutes at the end practicing a little somersault. Go on YouTube, check out some videos. There's lots of great tutorials on how to do a flip turn. It's just a fun little skill you can develop, and it'll make your swim sets much more fun and interesting. Open turns are another way to change direction. If you ever watch the Olympics, the breaststrokers are doing open turns. So basically, both hands touch the wall, and then they literally just change directions and push off. So very different than doing a somersault and then pushing off the wall. Drafting, exactly what it says. If you are close to another swimmer, so if you're swimming basically on their feet, not physically on their feet, we say on their feet, we mean like really close to their feet, you're going to get an advantage. It's just like drafting on a bicycle. Or if you watch Formula One racing and the cars get really close, they're drafting off of each other. So in swimming, that front swimmer is doing the bulk of the work and getting the water to move in the direction that you're going. And if you're the person behind, it's a huge, huge advantage. Drafting is a big deal in triathlon swimming. It's certainly something you want to become comfortable doing because you'll save a ton of energy. You might hear the word hypoxic being thrown around. Basically, this just means like hypoxic means less oxygen. Some of those breathing pattern sets that I was explaining earlier, we also call those hypoxic sets. So we're kind of adding a layer of stress to the workout because we're depriving ourselves of oxygen. It's quite awful, to be honest, but it really is a nice stressor, and it does help with some fitness. So if you hear the word hypoxic, that's generally what they're talking about. Those are all the terms I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Definitely check out the other webinars we've done so far. We're going to tackle biking and running lingo as well. So you can look forward to those coming up. And then we're going to move into some more advanced topics. Definitely, tune into the next ones. Hopefully, by the end of this series, which is ongoing, you'll learn something each time. And you can really empower yourself on this journey. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Take care, everybody.